Welcome, 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 everybody, to the A Little Less Fear podcast. I'm your producer and host of the show, Dr. Lino Martinez. This is your motivational podcast of people's incredible journeys. Oh, yeah, let's do this. Welcome back, everybody, to the A Little Less Fear podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lino, and I'm so happy to introduce Tina Davidson. She's a classical composer and writer now for 45 years. That's older than me. I'm 43. Oh, my goodness. She is articulate about her unique life, traveling to many countries, meeting Ernest Hemingway as a child, and the traumas she also experienced as a child. She shares her story in her memoir, Let Your Heart Be Broken, Life and Music from a Classical Composer, of years of depression and dissociation until she started working to reclaim herself through therapy and spiritual practice. All the while, she's a single parent, composing and creating works with major ensembles and orchestras. This is incredible. Welcome to A Little Less Fear podcast, Tina.
Oh, I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah.
It is an honor. This really is. And this is really my first time meeting a composer. This is incredible.
Oh.
I love orchestras. I mean, and I get so much peace in watching a live orchestra. I mean, the LA Philharmonic I've seen many times, and I was in choir in high school, and I just love traveling with the group, and just music really aligns me with my true nature of love, spirit, soul, and just the unity of everybody. It's really incredible how an orchestra is also deep within us, within our own spirit. Like, you are your own composer. Your body has its own way of composing itself, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
But we're here to, this is a personal growth story, an incredible story, and I'd like to know your story to where you are at today. You can start wherever you'd like. I know it's a loaded question.
Well, first of all, I'll show you the cover of my book.
Oh, I love this.
Broken. And I want to read you a little bit because I think this is a great preface. So we were talking a little bit about health and illnesses. And when I was 29, I was premiering my first piano concerto. And the week that I was really around the time that I'd never played with an orchestra before. I was a really good pianist. So I was premiering this piano concerto that I had written. And that day I felt kind of not very well. And I thought, on top of this, I've got the flu. And so when I performed, I didn't have that kind of nervous energy. The performance went really well, and we drove home, and I said to my boyfriend at the time, who later became my husband, I said, I can't actually get out of the car. And so he had to help me. And then I thought I just had a really bad case of the flu. And then he was away for the weekend working at the hospital, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. And I thought, oh my God, I've got a cold. And I got outside and I got cold medicine. Well, he came home and he was just lying with me. And he suddenly said, I think you have something wrong with your heart. And so the next day I went into the hospital and I was diagnosed with acute bacterial endocarditis, which is an infection, a blood infection that you can get usually from your mouth. This was strep, and I had been to a dentist, and my heart had been pretty badly damaged. So at 29, I went from a young person who could basically do anything to an old person who was coughing. And I decided at that point that I was going to live with this if I could, until I needed surgery, open heart surgery. And there wasn't much available at that point. Well, 9 years later, it had a really happy ending. But I had read a lot of books by Stephen Levine. He had worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who's sort of the guru of death and dying. And he had these beautiful books. And it was at a time where we were being overwhelmed with the AIDS crisis and HIV. And just it was it was a terrible time where friends, especially if you were in the arts, were dying of these, just terrible complications, and they were extremely young, and their partners or loved ones were taking care of them. So this was a conference. I had just been reading all his books, and I wanted to go, and I don't know if I'd had my surgery yet. But he was really addressing this very large crowd of caretakers. And he says, it's in the beginning of my book, an audience member stands. "What is the meaning of life?" he asks. Stephen Levine, author, poet best known for his work on death and dying, sits on a large stage looking down at 100 expectant faces. He relaxes back into his chair. "I am asked that all the time," he replies, "and I really don't know." He pauses, looking to the side, turns back smiling. "But I think the meaning of life is to let your heart be broken." And then
Wow.
I write later, "The heart, the round sphere of your being, let your heart be broken. Allow, expect, look forward to the life that you have so carefully protected and cared for. Broken, cracked, rent in two, heartbreakingly, your heart breaks, and in the two halves rocking on the table is revealed rich earth, moist, dark soil, ready for a new life to begin."
That is incredible.
So that's what the title comes from. And I think, everybody has their heart broken to some extent, some more, it's, in different ways. And when he said that, "Let your heart be broken," part of me was like going, "Oh, what?" Like,
Right.
no. But, he was a Buddhist, and the Buddhist concept is, that life is suffering. And what I took from this was that if you walk with your brokenness, if you stop resisting it and trying to bury it, and when you bury your brokenness, it always comes back and bites you anyway. It's always, sometimes it's like this terrible marionette, and you're doing all these kind of reenactments. But the idea is to go, meet it and not so much beat it, because he said, "Let your heart be broken." It wasn't like, it was sort of let what is happening happen. It's sort of like lowering your resistance and just sort of say, "Okay, this is what I've got." And so that was sort of the basis of this book. I do write a whole chapter on having very new surgery at that time. It was just at the beginning where they weren't replacing the valve, they were actually repairing it. And I talk about, Stephen Levine also says that illness is a great teacher, but like all great teachers, you have to let them go.
Yeah.
That idea of how much trauma or illness shapes you.
Right.
And when you start to really do the work to recover, sometimes it's very hard to let go of that. Almost like my illness was my red badge of courage, I'm sick, and to let it go, and to realize also that my illness had made all my choices for me. First of all, I couldn't be a professional pianist and a professional composer. I had to choose one. I just didn't have the stamina. So I decided just to be a composer, but it told me when to go to bed. It told me what to eat. It totally shaped all my choices. And then to have to start making those choices for myself was a very difficult time. I mean, I think people have this fantasy like, "Oh, now you're better. You could go up and, just climb Mount Everest." But I found it for me to be a process of learning how to do some of these things and having confidence to do them as well.
And how did that start? How did that start to gaining the confidence for you, not identifying with this illness and finding a different identity?
It was very slow. I had a wonderful dream at one point where my surgeon, I was in the hospital and the doctor was saying, "Oh, you did have open heart surgery, but there's something wrong. And my surgeon came in and he sat on my bed, sort of like he was a friend or even a brother. And he said, not now, sort of meaning, yeah, they're always going to be, it's never perfect. Yeah, you have this little abnormality, but it's not a problem. And I realized when I woke up is that I didn't trust, but he did trust. And sort of by proxy, I could learn from him how to trust. And sort of, he was like so heroic and amazing, but, he picked trust off the floor for me and gave it to me. So I think that there were many places that I started to learn confidence and started to realize that I really had to master my own ship, and that took a lot of responsibility.
And what happened next after you found out that the incredible, powerful word of trust? What happened from there on?
Well, I have to say, my heart disease was in the middle of finding out and really starting to name some things that happened to me as a child. So before, I had my heart disease. And then when I was about 31, I was doing well enough. I was just, on the bed every night at 7 o'clock. I didn't go out and drink. I didn't party. I was really managing. And the doctor said to me, you might want to have a kid if you want to have a kid. So my husband and I got pregnant. And when I was holding my daughter, and I write about her as being my great opportunity, I realized that there were things in my past that were really weighing me down. And I could put all those things in a box, wrap it up in beautiful paper with a beautiful bow, and just give it to my daughter unprocessed, and she could inherit my stuff. Or I could really start to get to work and do some heavy duty therapy and deal with things that I had known about my past, but hadn't really integrated into myself. So you wonder what those things are.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
So I was born in Stockholm, Sweden, and I was born in Stockholm. And when I was about 6 months old, I was put in a foster home in Malmö. And I lived with a family called the Emstos, and my mother was Solveig. My father was Torsten, and I had 3 older brothers, one of whom, the younger of the 3, was almost my age. So for 3 years, we were like twins. We just did everything together. And apparently I was sort of the ringleader. I was the naughty mischief maker. And, to be the only girl of 3 boys, let me tell you, my position was prized. And then when I was 3.5, this beautiful woman comes from America. She's a professor, a young professor, and she adopts me, and I leave. And then she got married, and suddenly I was, sort of slowly, I was the oldest of 5. So there's a 14-year gap between us. I was 7 when my first sibling was born.
I'm sorry, did you say, did I miss it? Did she adopted you and you left Sweden?
Yes. She brought me to America. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I sort of
to America. Okay.
She brought me to America when I was 3.5, and she met my stepfather when I was 5, and they got married. So my mother never distinguished from me from the other children. I was always part of the family, but I always knew there was something precarious about being adopted. They would talk about, grandfathers and, what this person did. And I'd go, oh, that is so cool. It's not my grandfather. I know it's not my history. I wonder what my history is. And of course, I had fantasies, that I was like a little orphan Annie, or, that I had lived, and I didn't remember anything about Sweden. My mother was not willing to talk about any of that. It was sort of like, it was dark. And then when I was 3.5, it was suddenly light. And that's all I remembered. So I happened to be in Sweden when I was 21. I was taking care of a daughter of a family friend of ours, and I was staying in Sweden, in Stockholm, for 2 months. And right as I was about to leave, I thought, I'm going to check in with the adoption agency. I'm going to find out who my parents were. And I always thought I was Swedish, Now, I don't have black hair now, but I used to have very black hair. I thought, well, okay, you could have a black-haired Swede, maybe. So I called the adoption agency, and at first they said, oh, we don't have any information. And then I called again, and they said, oh, come down. So she sat there reading this letter, and she said, this is a letter from your birth mother. And she asked me all questions about, how I was brought up. And finally she said, your biological mother is your adopted mother. You were adopted by your birth mother.
How did that happen?
By design.
You were adopted by your birth mother.
She had me in Sweden. She had placed me in the foster home. Mm-hmm. And then she'd come back 3 years later.
Oh.
Decided to adopt me.
Okay.
As a kind of very smart way to handle being in the 50s and having an illegitimate child. It could have cost her her job. That makes sense. Yeah, doesn't it? It makes
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The only thing that doesn't make sense is she never told me.
You never asked her about it?
It was really clear. I asked her one point about, doesn't it mean when you're adopted that your parents died or they didn't want you? And I looked around at her. I was washing dishes, and I looked around at her, and she had such a look on her face that all I remember is remember that look. And she said, yes, that's what adoption means. But I knew I couldn't talk to her about it. There was just the look of horror on her face was just, kids are so intuitive. And especially because I didn't feel I quite belonged. I was always like, not in my head, but when I look back now, I was, the happy, funny child who was always helpful. And, I think I just felt so precarious. And so when I got back from Sweden, I told her that I knew, and she said, oh, I'm so, I was going to tell you, but I never could find the right time. And I said, well, I'd like to tell my brothers and sisters. And she said, no. She said, this is a secret. You can't talk about it to anyone. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I could lose my job. I'm like 20. So, it's like in the 70s. So I think what happened is that she had never told anybody. She hadn't told her husband. She hadn't told her mother. She hadn't told any friends. Of course, my biological father knew. But I think she had kept this secret so rigidly and so carefully that she had no flexibility around it. It was
all because she had so much fear and them finding out and that she would lose her placement.
Yes. And to tell you the truth, this beautiful young woman adopting and saving a little child from another country, would have kind of dented that storyline. So I think there were a lot of things that she couldn't, she couldn't quite figure out how to negotiate. And I think also she really felt this was her story. It had nothing to do with me. It was the pain of having an out of wedlock child and being abandoned, which of course was terrible.
Sure.
But I think what I learned and that what I discuss in this book is that when you have a secret like that, you're always entitled to privacy, but a secret that is about somebody else can be very, very damaging.
Absolutely.
And her inability to sort of reconcile with me that it was also my story and my birth and how I wanted to describe myself put a lot of tension between us.
I can imagine.
Once it was out of the box, she didn't have control of it. Right. And I think, I had a lot of anger, a lot of confusion. So when I was holding my daughter, that was important for me at that point to start really digging in and doing hard work. What I do in my book is I have a short story always about my life. So when I was born, and then later on when I was in middle school, and then as a teenager, and, et cetera, et cetera. And then every other chapter are journals that I kept when my daughter was born, when I was in the middle of my composing career. And so they are not only about how I write music and what I'm writing, but it's also some reflection on the therapy, on the childhood issues that I'm going through at the same time. And as you go through the book, they become closer and closer together. And so it sort of merges into one story. But I talk every other chapter about how I am composing music, what my process is, and also how what I'm learning and understanding about my childhood is affecting my music. So for instance,
yeah, I'm really interested to know how it affected your music.
So I have a cello quartet that I wrote, and it's called Dark Child Sings. And it's about that dark child in me that I wanted to give voice to. And I really wanted that child, who I actually think, oddly enough, is kind of a male. I always think of the dark child as male, just giving him voice so he could really not only sing out some of the hard things, but some of the, once you get past the hard things, you start to dance. There is some joy and some movement in that. Another piece I had written quite a few pieces to my Swedish foster mother. I think one of the things that was very painful that I hadn't understood at all is that when I started to do therapy, I got in touch with the fact that when I left as a 3.5-year-old, without any kind of ceremony, it was sort of like, well, maybe they said something to me, but I don't know if I remembered it or even comprehended it at 3.5.
Right.
But it was as if my mother and my father and my brothers and sisters had died in a terrible accident. They suddenly disappeared. And not only that, I lost my home, my country, even my language, because I only spoke Swedish.
That's very traumatic. That point. That's so traumatic.
So I not only had no words, I had no understanding of how much grief I was holding.
Absolutely, Tina.
As this little child that had no way.
So much loss. It was just pulled out of you, pulled away from you.
Well, and I think at that time we had no concept of kids. Oh, great, we saved this kid. They were in an orphanage, now they're not. We didn't think, oh my God, what has this child gone through?
Exactly.
And now we are much more aware and have ways of communicating and allowing those children to draw it or to express it in some way. And then, when they get older, to express it again, wherever it comes out, just to keep on expressing it. So I think there was a lot of complication for me. And my daughter sort of opened the door and allowed me. She didn't give me permission, but I knew the cost to her would be sort of the cost of what my mother gave me. And I really wanted to be a different kind of parent. And my mother was a great mother. I don't want to, slam her. She was smart and funny and loved the arts, and she loved to read to us, and she took us to all sorts of things. We traveled all over. I lived in Istanbul, Turkey for 3 years, and then we all lived in Germany for a year and Israel for a year. And then they lived in Chile for almost 1.5 years. So she would go off with my stepfather, who was also a professor. And I always say that my parents were adventurers disguised as professors. Basically, they just wanted to adventure, which gets us to Hemingway.
Yeah, how did you meet Ernest Hemingway?
How did you get to Hemingway? Well, when my parents, my mom and stepfather, married, they must have been in their 30s, which was kind of in the 60s, a little bit late to get married. So they ran off to Key West with me. We spent Christmas in Key West. So I was just 5. And they were looking at Hemingway's house, and they were talking about projects they wanted to do together. And one of the projects was to interview famous authors. And they said, well, who is the closest famous author to Key West? And of course, it was Hemingway. He lived in Cuba at that point. So we took a plane over to Havana.
Wow.
And somehow, because you could do that then.
Sure.
This must have been 57, 58. Okay. Must have been the December of 57. Yeah, December of 57. So somehow they got his name and address. So they got his telephone number. They called him up.
That's
like
incredible.
you do, like you do. You
That's
call
outrageous.
it anyway. And he said, well, you're young professors and you want to, okay, come over tomorrow. It was Christmas Day.
Oh, whoa.
We figured out where he was and finally got there. And he saw a camera around my stepfather's neck. My stepfather is quite tall, 6'4", and quite imposing. And he said, oh, you're not professors. You're those journalists. And I guess Mary Hemingway was going, no, dear, they're professors. So finally they let us in, and he was pretty grumpy about it.
Yeah.
And I don't remember much. Apparently I sat in the kitchen while he was cooking the Christmas turkey, and they interviewed him, and we have beautiful, beautiful pictures of him outside. And unfortunately, 4 years later, he took his life. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Wow.
No. So they went on to interview many famous authors: Carson McCullers, Catherine M. Porter, Carl Sandburgs, James Thurber. James Baldwin. When we were living in Turkey, he was living in Turkey as well. So he came. I guess they had a party for him or something. I don't know. Yeah, they had a lot of interests and a lot of, they really lived life fully.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
It sounds like a very colorful, fruitful life. Mm-hmm. Adventurous.
Oh my gosh, yes. When they were in Santiago, Chile, my stepfather had gotten a Fulbright there, and my mother took a sabbatical down there. And they were down there for, I think, 1.5 years. And then they decided they would drive to Pittsburgh. Well, from Santiago, Chile, down at the bottom of South America.
How long did that take? Wow.
It's 15,000 miles.
Holy moly.
Exactly.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. And that was during the time, that was, I think, in 76, 77. And that was the time when there was a lot of agitation in Nicaragua, and there were the Sandinistas, and it was not a good time to be traveling up, through Peru and up through Mexico.
Yeah.
But let's drive to Pittsburgh.
My goodness.
Yeah,
and
I think
that's pretty much where you ended, where you're at now, correct?
The book, or which
you yourself.
I wasn't there. I was in college at that point, so I didn't drive.
Okay.
No, I didn't drive with them. They had 3 of my brothers and sisters, and it was a Dodge Dart. And that car somehow made it. I don't know. I don't know how they did it, but it took them a couple months. Yeah.
Wow, that's outrageous.
Yeah.
So bring us into the present, and how you continue to compose, and how did all of your traumas all contribute to your musical language?
Well, I think, I've been composing for 45 years. And when I look at my history, I think the first 10 years, I was sort of composing without really understanding myself. And I think the music has a little bit of that fracture in it. It's just, and then when I started doing therapy, the first piece I was writing was a cello concerto, and it was called one of my sisters, a poet. Oh, it's called Blood Memory.
Whoa, I love it.
Blood Memory.
Love
Yeah.
that.
And that was the first piece that I felt that I was really gripping onto something that was personal. So then that next 10 years or so, the composing was very much about what I was, I've always written about me. And I think that a lot of composers don't do that. They just write music. And a lot of writers don't write about themselves. They write about other things. But for me, I really feel that my connection to music is, how does my body operate? How does my rhythm
Sure.
is it generated from my body? How are those things pulsing out? That's been my connection. So after the second 20 years, I think I had worked enough on myself that I stopped being as interested in my personal journey and was interested in my journey with the outside.
Uh-huh.
So how do I relate to the world, the broader world, or to the spiritual world, or to the sky, or to nature, or to things that I don't know? Mm-hmm. So music started to really
transform.
Really a vehicle to explore that relationship. So I started writing pieces. I had a piece in the second decade called Woman Dreaming. So like, how am I dreaming of myself? How am I starting to understand myself? And also I've always written music about myself in my gender. So I just felt that the gender allowed me to really explore rhythms. So let's talk about music. We have something in music at the end of a piece. We call it the climax. That's really interesting. Yeah. The climax. So if you listen to classical music, a lot of it ends with a lot of fanfare. There is this sort of bursting and bombs and, this downbeat and this kind of bomb. Draw your own conclusions.
Sure.
So if I feel that Beethoven was true to his class and his upbringing, his religion, he was really speaking through himself, then that kind of climax could be about how he ends things as a male. So that sort of allowed me, once I put that gender to it, I thought, oh, cool. How do I do it?
Sure.
What is different? What is it about me here in the 20th century? Because I really feel that artists who really speak about themselves in their time reflect for us what's going on in a kind of very subtle kind of way. So that made me realize that the way I understand rhythms and endings of pieces is there's this sort of this kind of watery motion, this kind of constant kind of movement that changes and maybe becomes heightened, but then relaxes. And that, I'm much more of someone who feels that my energy touches down, and the minute it touches down, it also goes up again.
Rises
so
up.
This kind of reverberation or bounce to it. And that was very instructive to me in how I create rhythms and continuity in my music. I don't use any of the classical forms. They call it ABA. So you have a statement, you have an A theme, a melody, and then you do a little mushing around with it and do something in the B, and then you come back to it. I don't do that. But I think it's all connected in some sort of stream of consciousness kind of way. You're always like going, oh, I didn't expect to be there, but got it. Yeah, that's where I should be. Oh, I'm going along for the rest of the ride. So I think, as I emerged into my third and fourth decade, that sense of connected to a bigger place was very much in my music. I didn't know very much about spirituality. I didn't think I was very connected to it. So I was always exploring it in my music. I have a piece called It Is My Heart Singing. I think the next piece was Delight of Angels. So the idea that the angels, according to Jewish and Christian tradition, angels dance endlessly in the joy of being with God. They can't help themselves. They're just, they're in such delight and community with God that their expression is just this joy.
That's beautiful.
And then, I have another piece that I wrote called Barefoot, which is not only about being on the earth and being barefoot, but, from the Bible, in the Old Testament, there's the burning bush, and he has to take his shoes off to approach the burning bush. He has to be barefoot. And that idea of taking off your shoes and, touching the ground and touching holy ground, it's a string orchestra piece.
Wow, that sounds pretty magical.
Yeah, so I've been exploring a lot, and now it's interesting, in this 5th decade, I think I'm returning to more personal stuff, but it's not trauma oriented. So I have a piece called Hum, and it's about, a mother humming to their child and that kind of loving embrace. I have another piece called, that one is called Hush. The one for Hush is about sort of a mother's sense of hushing a child. And usually I just hold a word as I compose a piece. I wrote during the pandemic, I wrote a piece called Leap. This whole idea of, we just leapt off the cliff together. And, it was a totally different world, that we were in. And then I wrote a piece for my second divorce called Weepan, W-E-P-E-N, which is the old English for weeping.
Oh, whoa.
So they're more personal pieces, but they're not as trauma influenced. So
you're able to listen to these pieces from different decades in your life and go back into the feeling of what you were going through at that time.
A little bit, maybe, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't really know. I know what I was thinking at that time. And I really feel that music is always a collaboration. I am collaborating with myself and with the idea of how I'm going to write this. Mm-hmm. And then once it's done, then I have to collaborate with the performers because they have to live in my music. They have to express it.
Wow.
And many times, from a classical tradition, we're always told to get exactly what the composer is trying to do. Represent the composer. And I usually say to them, I said, hey, we've done the rehearsal. They're kind of tired. And I said, look, this is your moment. This is your vehicle. You forget about the notes, make mistakes. The notes really don't matter. It's what you're telling the audience. That's what matters.
Yeah.
Just be in it. And then when they perform, they're also collaborating with the audience because the piece doesn't really exist if you don't listen to it, right?
Right.
I mean, I could be writing a ton of pieces, but in terms of, at least if I created a piece of art, it would be someplace and somebody could see it. But music is, it doesn't exist without performers willing to be able to play it.
So true.
I always feel that the performers are collaborating with the audience, that the audience has to receive it. And there is this kind of energy between them that makes the performance. So I always think of it in terms of collaboration.
I love that.
And permission. Sure. Do what you need to do.
Have you ever had pieces that came out, more phenomenal than you had imagined it?
Well, there's always a moment where I have a secret little smile. Like I go, that I really got to the kernel of what I was trying to do. And there are also times when I've written a piece and I go, whoa, I don't think I want this. It's been performed once and I'm like going, oh, I'm going to hide this piece. It just, for some reason, the balance, there's so many things that go into creating a work of art. It's where does the energy go? What's the balance between the beginning and the middle? What's the story, which is a beginning, middle, and the end? And does the end have any relationship to the beginning? And there are all sorts of things that you have to balance, and sometimes they're off.
Yeah.
And I've always felt that I'm not somebody who tinkers with my music. Usually I write it. Sometimes I will edit it. I will shorten things, or I will, I don't move things, but maybe this energy doesn't, it's trying to go here, but it kind of, and I have to take out that little section, like beautiful sewing,
Sure.
to make it fit the body. You have to have, that's why a handmade suit, it's so amazing because it contours your body.
So true.
I always, if it's a bad piece, I go, oh, all right, just move on,
Sure.
just learn and move on. But there are times when I go, yeah, that's, and am I surprised? Not as much anymore. I'm pleased. I guess that could be the other word for surprised.
Sure.
Like, oh, yeah, that bloomed in a way that I really, really wanted and hoped for, and that feels great. Yeah.
Why would you be surprised before and now you're pleased? What's the difference?
I think it's before, when I was surprised, it was I hadn't accumulated enough information. I think that's the other thing. I think when you have had a life as an artist, you have to remember that you're always accumulating information and sounds and maturity. And I think before, when I was surprised, it was because I just didn't know enough. And so when a piece came out in a certain way, I'd be surprised. Or especially when you're writing for orchestras, there's so many sound combinations that you can make. How does a flute sound alone? How does a flute sound like when it's playing with a violins? How does a flute and clarinet sound together when they're playing the same note? And I think that you gain all this information that's stored in your head someplace. And so I think now I'm more like, I'm pleased. Yeah, I'm less surprised. Things are just, I guess I just know myself better, perhaps.
That makes sense, actually. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because you know exactly how it all works. How it all works. And so because of that, you're able to just focus in more on the type of peace that it brings within you, and the satisfaction that you created something complete coming from a more experienced human being. That's really amazing.
Now, I'm not saying it makes it easier to write. It's like, I still sweat bullets. I still, I have this relationship with procrastination. I used to think that procrastination was that I wasn't sitting down and doing my work. Now I see it as part of my process. And when I procrastinate, I go, oh, cool. I guess I'm in the process of writing music. Or
sure you are.
I think also, you learn so much more about how you work. I know that, especially when I'm writing something, I've been writing a lot of essays lately about music, and there are times where I just know the tone is wrong. I know the angle, the approach of this essay that I'm writing is all wrong. It's maybe too negative, and I have to rewrite the whole thing, and I don't have a clue how to do it. So I always say to my students, take a nap, go to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Recharge your batteries.
Well, also your brain can really come up with great solutions.
Sure, sometimes even in your dreams. Yeah.
Yes. No, I think your brain has a way of sweeping things clean. Maybe you can understand the problem better. Maybe it just takes anxiety out of the picture, and or maybe it solves it. I have no idea. Yeah, but I always say take a nap.
Tina, what is the biggest takeaway of your book?
I think I would put it in a sort of personal way. I was asked by a podcaster to write 10 things that I would share with somebody now.
Mm-hmm.
And I have 2 things that I really like. So first one is share your joy. Share your joy. Absolutely. Communicate your love of the work with others. Share rather than teach. Motivate rather than lecture. Include rather than talk to. Teaching implies a hierarchy. Sharing is between equals. So I think that's sharing your joy. And, I love music. I would love everybody to write music. I could see taking over the world and making everybody write music. I think it would be good for every part of them. And then the last thing that I sort of have learned is dare to create yourself anew. Heartbreak, failure, being sidelined, all of these are part of life. It's how we act on these, manage them, learn, move through them, and dare to try again in a strengthened position that matters.
That's beautiful, Tina.
So, that idea of just, it's not over. It's not over. So just dare and use your community, use your friends, use your resources to prop you up in every way that you need. You are entitled to support. So yeah, I
love how you said that. You are entitled to support, because a lot of people don't feel that they can ask anybody.
No, and not only are you entitled, it is such a gift to the person you're asking.
Oh my God.
That you ask somebody something they can offer, they can help you with. It's a kind of a win-win in so many ways. And so yeah, that's sort of
absolutely
where
beautiful.
I am.
I love that, Tina. Tina, this has been an honor, incredible energy, and just sharing your life story and just everything that you've gone through to where you are at today. Such a beautiful story. Thank you so much. How can our viewers, our watchers, and our listeners find your book and your music? Oh, super easy. If you know my name, Tina Davidson, just go to my website, tinadavidson.com. On Spotify or Pandora or Apple Music. Again, just search under Tina Davidson. Amazon.com has my book. I'm pretty searchable. You can go on, you can be my friend on Facebook, or you can follow me on my Facebook page, or be a friend on Instagram. So I think I'm pretty available. Yeah. So nice to meet you, Tina. I don't know why I say Tina. Tina, so nice to meet you. This has been really an honor. Thank you so much. I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and I'm definitely checking out your music tonight. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a joy and a pleasure. An absolute joy. Thank you. Thank you all so much for tuning in to the Dr. Lino Show, A Little Less Fear podcast. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can do so by sending me an email at alittlelessfear@gmail.com, or through an inquiry from my website at www.alittlelessfear.com, where you will always find information on where to get my book. You can get my book on Amazon and Amazon paperback version, Kindle or Kindle Unlimited. And I also create incredible visual video poetry for people that are interested in marketing, or even just to send a personal note to anybody or somebody that you might love. So yeah, check it out. I love it. Poetry is my passion, one of my other passions, aside from doing what I do right now, which is giving you all the motivation that you need to keep growing, to keep motivating people, motivating yourself, and to keep expanding. I love you all so much. Have a blessed day and take care. Rock on.